I woke up in a forest, not my world. My hands were shaking, my shirt was torn, and I could hear something running behind me, fast, too fast to be human. I turned my head just for 1 second, and I saw him. Golden eyes, sharp teeth, a face I somehow knew even in this strange new body. He was not just chasing me, he was hunting me, like I was something he needed to catch, not someone he wanted to save. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. My legs moved on their own, pushing through the trees, branches cutting my arms. Behind me, I heard him growl one word: my name. How did he know my name? Why did my chest hurt every time he got closer? And why, deep down, did some small part of me not want to run anymore? Before we go further, if stories like this pull you in, hit subscribe. It really helps me keep making more. Now, let's go back to where this all began. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you know where it started. My name was Daniel, just a normal guy. I worked a normal job in a normal city, and I went to bed one night after eating leftover noodles and watching some show I don't even remember the name of anymore. That's it. That was my whole exciting life. Then I woke up on grass. Not my bed, grass. Cold, wet morning grass with the smell of pine trees so strong it made my eyes water. I sat up fast, and the first thing I noticed was my hands. They were not my hands, longer fingers, a small white scar across one knuckle that I never had before. I looked down at my chest and saw a body that was leaner, stronger, like someone who trained every single day of his life. I was in someone else's skin. And the second thing I noticed, sitting up on that hill, looking down at a village made of wood and stone with smoke curling from the chimneys, was that the sky here had two suns. Small ones. Pale, but two. Okay, so not Earth, got it. I want to tell you I panicked right away, screamed, ran around like crazy. But honestly, I just sat there for a long moment, staring at those two suns, thinking, this can't be real, this has to be a dream, and any second now my alarm is going to go off. It didn't go off. A voice called out behind me, low and rough, and when I turned around, a man walked up the hill toward me. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair falling over sharp eyebrows and eyes the color of wet earth, brown but almost gold in the light. He wore a leather vest over a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows like someone who worked with his hands. He stopped a few steps away and studied my face carefully, like he was checking to see if I was really who he thought I was. "You're finally awake," he said. "You scared me. You've been out here since last night." I opened my mouth, and here's the strange part. Words came out. Not English. Some language I never learned in my life, flowing out smooth and easy like it had always been mine. "I'm fine," I said, even though I clearly was not fine, just needed some air. He raised one eyebrow, not fully believing me, but he let it go. He held out a hand to help me up, and the second our skin touched, something happened. A small jolt, like static but warmer. He felt it too, I could tell, because his fingers tightened around mine for just a second before he let go and looked away, jaw tight. Interesting. His name, I would learn a few minutes later, was Kale. And apparently, in this body I was now living in, he was supposed to be my closest friend. Maybe more than a friend. The villagers we passed on the way down the hill kept giving us these little knowing looks, whispering behind their hands, smiling like they were watching some slow romance play out in front of them. I didn't know the full story yet. All I knew was this body belonged to a young man named Iron, the son of the village healer, and Kale was the village's strongest hunter, the guy everyone respected, the guy little kids ran up to and asked to see his knife collection. And judging by how the whole village stared at us walking side by side, Iron and Kale were something. Whatever that something was, I hadn't caught up on it yet. Kale walked me back to a small wooden house at the edge of the village, where an older woman with silver hair was boiling something over a fire that smelled like herbs and smoke. She looked up when we walked in, then her eyes went straight to Kale's face, like she already knew he'd found me. "You didn't come home last night," she said to me, not even asking Kale, already knowing exactly whose fault it probably was. "Kale, did you find him passed out in the woods again?" "On the hill," Kale said, and there was something in his voice, something careful, almost protective when he said it. "He's fine, just tired." The woman, who I figured out was Iron's mother, sighed and shook her head, muttering something about how her son was going to be the death of her, and went back to stirring her pot. I sat down at the wooden table and Kale sat across from me, close enough that our knees almost touched, and for a second neither of us said anything. He just looked at me, really looked like he was searching my face for something. "You've been different lately," he finally said, quiet, almost like he didn't want his own mother to hear, "ever since the ceremony." "Ceremony, okay, new information." I didn't know what ceremony he meant, but I filed it away, nodding slowly like I understood, hoping he'd keep talking so I could figure out what I'd walked into. "I don't know what you mean," I said carefully. Kale's eyes narrowed slightly, not angry, just confused, like he was trying to read a book with missing pages. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "You barely look at me anymore, and every time I get close, you flinch." I hadn't done any of that. Iron had. And whatever was going on in Iron's head before I showed up in his body, it clearly had something to do with Kale. I wanted to ask him straight out, "Hey, what happened between you two?" But that felt like the fastest way to make everyone think I'd lost my mind. So instead, I just shrugged and said something vague about not feeling well lately, and Kale let it go, even though I could tell he didn't fully believe me. Later that day, walking through the village on my own, trying to get a feel for this new world, I passed by two hunters near the well, talking low. "I heard the beast folk territory is close this year," one of them said, "closer than it's ever been." "Don't say that too loud," the other one said. "You'll scare the kids." Beast folk, another word I didn't know yet, but something about the way they said it made the hair on my arm stand up. Not evil exactly, just dangerous, like something wild that lived just outside the edge of what people considered safe. That night I lay in Iron's small bed, staring up at a wooden ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. New body, new world, a hunter named Kale who looked at me like I owed him an explanation, a mysterious ceremony, something called beast folk living somewhere nearby. And through the small window beside my bed, past the trees, past the edge of the village, I swore I saw two gold eyes in the dark, watching, just for a second, then gone. I told myself it was nothing, just tired eyes playing tricks after a very strange day. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. 3 days passed and I started to get the hang of things. I learned that Iron's mother's name was Sella, that she made the whole village's medicine, and that Iron himself had some small gift for healing too, though he barely used it. I learned the market square, the well, the path down to the river. I learned to nod along when villagers greeted me by name, even though half of them I couldn't place. What I could not get used to was Kale. He kept finding reasons to be near me. He'd show up at the healer's house with some excuse, a cut on his arm that barely needed a bandage, a headache that vanished the second I touched his forehead to check his temperature. Sella would just roll her eyes and go back to her herbs, like this was a pattern she'd seen too many times to comment on anymore. "You don't have to keep doing this," I told him on the third day, sitting on the porch step while he pretended to sharpen a knife that was already sharp enough to shave with. "Doing what?" he said, not looking up. "Finding reasons to see me." His hand paused on the blade, just for a second. Then he went back to sharpening, jaw tight, like I'd caught him doing something he wasn't ready to admit to. "Maybe I like your company," he said finally, quiet, almost daring me to make something of it. I didn't know what to say to that. Iron's memories were still hazy, like watching someone else's home movies through frosted glass, but I was starting to get flashes. A hand held too long. A conversation cut short. Someone walking away before saying something important. Whatever had happened between Iron and Kale, it was unfinished, and it hurt, in a way that made my own chest ache even though the memory wasn't fully mine. That evening, everything changed. It started with the bell. I was helping Sella sort dried herbs into little cloth bags when the village bell rang out, 3 sharp times, and every single person in that house went still. Sella's hands froze mid-motion. Her face went pale. "That's the border bell," she said, voice tight. "Something's crossed the line." I didn't understand yet what that meant, but I understood the fear on her face, and fear like that doesn't need translation. Outside, the whole village was moving at once, doors slamming, people grabbing children and pulling them inside, hunters running toward the tree line with bows already strung. I stepped out onto the porch just in time to see Kale sprinting past, a long knife in his hand, and he stopped, just for a second, when he saw me standing there. "Get inside," he said, not gentle this time, sharp, the voice of a man giving an order he needed obeyed. Now. "What's happening?" I called after him. "Beast folk," he shouted back, already running again. "One of them crossed the border. Get inside, Iron, please." That word again. Beast folk. And this time it wasn't 2 hunters whispering by a well. This was the whole village bracing itself like something dangerous was already among the trees, already close, already watching. I should have gone inside. I want you to know that. I knew I should have gone inside. But there was a pull in my chest, something under my ribs that felt like a string pulling tight, and my feet moved toward the tree line instead of away from it, like my body remembered something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Sella grabbed my arm at the door. "Iron, don't you dare." "I'll be careful," I said, which was a stupid thing to say, because I had no idea what careful even meant in a world with 2 sons and a bell that made grown men grab their weapons. I pulled free before she could stop me and ran toward the trees, following the sound of shouting hunters and the crack of branches. The forest was darker than the village, thick trees blocking most of the light, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Then I heard a sound that stopped me cold, a low growl, not an animal growl, something deeper, something that sounded almost like words trying to escape through teeth that weren't shaped for talking. I turned toward it, and through a gap in the trees I saw him. At first my brain tried to make him into something normal, a very tall man in a dark coat maybe. But then the light hit his face, and I saw the sharp angles that weren't quite human, the ears that sat higher and more pointed than any person's, the eyes that glowed faint gold even in the shade, locked directly on me like he'd been waiting. He was crouched low near a fallen tree, one hand pressed against his side, dark red staining his fingers. Hurt. Whatever had happened before I arrived, someone had already gotten a hit in. I froze. He froze too, watching me with those gold eyes, breathing hard, and for a long moment neither of us moved. Then he spoke, and his voice was rough, low, like gravel dragged over stone. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I said, before my brain caught up with my mouth. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, almost, and I know this sounds strange, almost amusement. "Fair," he said. Behind me, I heard shouting getting closer, Kale's voice among them, calling my name with real panic in it now. The beastman's eyes flicked past me toward the sound, and something in his expression shifted, sharpened, like a man calculating how much time he had left. "They're going to kill me," he said, quieter now, not scared exactly, just stating a fact. "If they find me like this." I don't know why I did what I did next. I've asked myself that question 100 times since. Maybe it was Iron's healer instinct sitting somewhere under my own thoughts. Maybe it was something else entirely, something I didn't have a name for yet. I stepped toward him instead of away. "Let me see," I said, nodding at his side. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're not afraid of me." "I'm terrified," I said honestly, "but you're bleeding and I might be able to help." For a second I thought he'd refuse, or worse, that he'd bolt into the trees and disappear before I got close enough to do anything. Instead, he let out a breath, something between a laugh and disbelief, and moved his hand away from the wound just enough to let me see. It was bad, deep. My hands moved almost on their own, some healer's memory in Iron's fingers guiding me even though my own mind had no clue what I was doing, pressing cloth against the wound, applying pressure the way I'd apparently done 100 times before in this body's life. "Why," he said, watching my face closely while I worked, "would you help someone like me?" I looked up at him, right into those glowing gold eyes, and something passed between us. Recognition, maybe, or something older than that. My chest ached again, that same pull from before, stronger now, sitting right where a heartbeat should be. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I couldn't just leave you here." His eyes searched my face for a long moment, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't expect to find in the middle of a forest. Then the shouting behind me got closer, close enough now that I could hear individual voices, and his whole body went rigid. "You need to go," he said, suddenly urgent, pulling back from my hands. "Now, before they see you with me." "But your wound." "I'll manage." He was already pulling himself upright, favoring one side, glancing toward the trees behind him like he was already planning his escape route. Then he paused, just for a second, and looked back at me one more time. "What's your name?" he asked. "Iron," I said. Something crossed his face when I said it. Recognition, maybe, or shock. I couldn't quite tell, and there wasn't time to ask, because Kale's voice rang out from just behind the trees, close now, way too close. "Iren." The beastman's eyes locked with mine one final second. "We'll meet again," he said, low and certain, like a promise instead of a guess. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows of the trees faster than I thought a wounded man could move, and 30 seconds later Kale burst through the same gap in the trees, knife raised, eyes wild with panic, scanning the area until they landed on me, alive, unharmed, standing alone. "Iron." He crossed the distance between us fast, grabbing my shoulders, checking me over like he needed to confirm with his own hands that I was really okay. "Are you hurt? Did it touch you?" "I'm fine," I said, which was true physically at least. Kale's eyes searched the tree line behind me, suspicious, like he could smell something was off even if he couldn't prove it yet. "It was here," he said slowly, not quite a question. I didn't answer right away, and that hesitation told him everything he needed to know. "Iron," he said, voice low now, careful, "what did you see?" I looked back toward the trees where the beastman had disappeared, and somewhere deep in my chest, that same pull tugged again, quiet but certain. "We'll meet again," he'd said. I had a feeling he was right. Kale didn't push me for an answer that night. He walked me home in silence, his hand hovering near my back the whole way, like he thought I might fall over from shock at any second. Sella took one look at my face when we got inside and didn't ask questions either. She just handed me a cup of something warm and bitter and told me to drink it and go to bed. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw gold eyes watching me from the dark, and that voice, low and rough, saying we'll meet again like it was already decided. 3 days passed with nothing. No bell, no shouting. Just normal village life and me pretending to be normal along with it, helping Sella grind herbs, listening to villagers complain about small things, letting Kale walk beside me like he'd been doing since before I got here. On the 4th day, everything cracked open. It happened at the well. I was filling a bucket, minding my own business, when an old woman named Myrna, one of the village elders, stopped beside me and studied my face the way you'd study a painting you suspected was a forgery. "You've been odd since the ceremony," she said, not unkind, just observant. "Sella says you don't remember things you should remember." My stomach dropped. "I've just been tired." Myrna's eyes narrowed slightly. "The binding ceremony doesn't cause tiredness, boy, it causes bonding." She said the word slow, deliberate, watching my face for a reaction. You and Kale were bound 3 months ago, body and soul tied together before the old gods, and yet you flinch every time he touches your hand. I nearly dropped the bucket. Bound, body and soul. Iron and Kale weren't just close friends or almost something. They were married in every way this world understood marriage, maybe deeper than that. And somewhere in Iron's foggy memories, something had gone wrong enough that he'd started pulling away from his own husband. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, and Myrna took my silence as confirmation of something, nodding slowly to herself before walking away, muttering about the young forgetting what mattered. I found Kale later that afternoon by the river, sharpening arrows, and I sat down across from him, my heart hammering. Myrna talked to me today, I said. His hand stilled, he didn't look up. What did she say? About the binding ceremony. I watched his face carefully. About us. Kale's jaw tightened, and for a long moment he just stared at the arrow in his hands like it held the answer to a question he didn't want to say out loud. You don't remember it, he said, quiet, not a question this time. No, I admitted. I don't remember a lot of things. He set the arrow down slowly, and when he finally looked at me, there was something raw in his eyes, something that looked a lot like grief. You used to remember everything about us, every small thing. Then after the ceremony, you started forgetting little things. First small things, then bigger ones. I thought maybe it was stress. Then I thought maybe you regretted it. His voice cracked slightly on that last part. Regretted me. My chest twisted. Whatever I felt for Kale, this new stranger wearing a familiar face in a world I didn't understand, some small part of it wasn't entirely unfamiliar. Some part of me, buried under all this confusion, ached at the idea of him hurting because of something I didn't even remember doing. I don't think it's that, I said carefully. I think something happened to me. I don't think I'm all here anymore, not the way I was. Kale studied my face for a long moment, searching for a lie and finding none. Then what happened to you? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound insane, so I gave him half the truth. I don't know, but I'm trying to figure it out. He didn't push further, but I could see it settling into him. A new kind of worry replacing the old one, and somehow that felt worse. That night the bell rang again. This time I didn't hesitate before running toward the tree line. And this time, Sela didn't try as hard to stop me, like some part of her already knew it was useless. The forest was chaos, hunters shouting, torches flickering between the trees, and somewhere in the middle of it, I heard a familiar low growl, cut short by pain. I found him again near the same fallen tree, except this time 3 hunters had him cornered, bows drawn. And this time the wound on his side looked worse. An arrow lodged deep near his ribs, dark red soaking through his coat. Don't move, one hunter shouted. One more step and we put another arrow in you. The beast man's eyes were locked on the hunters, breathing hard, cornered, and for the first time since I'd seen him, he looked less like a threat and more like something desperate and dying. I stepped between them before I could think it through. Iron, get back, one of the hunters snapped. Wait, I said, hands up, just wait. He's dangerous, another hunter said. Move before he hurts you. He's not going to hurt me, I said, and somehow I believed it completely, even though I had no proof of that at all. The beast man's gold eyes flicked to my face, something shifting in them, disbelief mixed with something warmer, something that looked almost like hope. Iron, he said, my name in his mouth sounding different than it had before, softer. Kale's voice cut through the trees then, arriving fast, and when he saw me standing between armed hunters and a wounded beast man, his face went through about 5 emotions at once, landing hardest on fear. Iron, move, Kale said, already pulling his bow up. No, I said, firmer than I meant to. Nobody's shooting him. He's beast folk, one hunter argued. He's been crossing our border for months. This isn't the first time. Months, My stomach dropped again. This wasn't a one-time accident. This beast man had been coming here, again and again, long before I ever showed up in Iron's body. The beast man's eyes flicked toward me at that, something guilty crossing his face, like he'd been caught in something he wasn't ready to explain. "Why do you keep crossing the border?" I asked him directly, ignoring the hunters around us, ignoring Kale's tense presence at my side. He was quiet for a long moment, blood soaking further into his coat, breathing labored. "Because of you," he finally said. The clearing went completely silent. "What does that mean?" Kale's voice was low now, dangerous, aimed at the beast man like a weapon of its own. The beast man's gold eyes never left my face. "You don't remember me," he said, not a question, a realization settling into place. "Do you really don't remember?" "Remember what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, except there was no humor in it, just something broken. "Before the binding ceremony, before Kale, there was someone else who found you in these woods 3 years ago, lost and alone, far from any village. Someone who helped you when you had nowhere else to go." My skin went cold. "That was you," I said slowly. "That was me," he confirmed. Kale's bow lowered slightly, his face pale now, staring at the beast man like he was seeing him for the first time. "That's not possible," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Iron has been part of this village his whole life." "Has he?" the beast man said quietly. "Or is that just what everyone assumed because nobody asked?" The hunters shifted uncomfortably, glancing between each other, and I realized in that moment that whatever history existed here, it went far deeper than a simple border crossing, deeper than a binding ceremony gone wrong, deeper than anything I'd pieced together so far. "You said we'll meet again," I said quietly, remembering his words from days ago. "You weren't talking about strangers meeting for the first time." "No," he admitted, "I wasn't." Kale's hand tightened on his bow, jaw clenched hard enough that I could see the muscle jump. "Why are you telling him this now?" The beast man's gold eyes finally moved from my face to Kale's, steady despite the blood loss, despite the arrows still aimed at him. "Because he deserves to know the truth, even if the truth costs me everything." Behind us, one of the hunters shifted his aim slightly, impatient, and I realized we were running out of time before this conversation turned violent again. "Nobody is shooting anyone," I said again, louder this time, stepping fully in front of the beast man, ignoring Kale's sharp intake of breath beside me. "Not until I understand what's happening, not until someone tells me the truth." The beast man's eyes softened slightly as he looked at me, something painfully tender beneath all that exhaustion and blood loss. "Careful, Iron," he said quietly, "standing this close to me. It might cost you more than you think." I didn't move. Somewhere behind that warning was something that sounded almost like hope, and something else quieter that sounded a lot like fear for me instead of himself. "Let it cost me," I said. "I need to know who you are." He held my gaze for a long, heavy moment, blood still soaking through his coat. Hunters still frozen with weapons half raised. Kale standing rigid and pale beside me like his entire world had just cracked down the middle. "My name," the beast man finally said, "is Roran, and 3 years ago, before anyone bound you to anyone else, I was supposed to be yours." Nobody moved for a long moment. Just the wind and blood dripping slowly from Roran's side onto the forest floor, and Kale's ragged breathing beside me like he'd forgotten how to fill his lungs properly. "That's not possible," Kale said again, quieter this time, like saying it softer might make it more true. "Ask Sella," Roran said, still on one knee, still watching me like I was the only solid thing in a world that was spinning. "Ask her what happened to Iron 3 years ago. Ask her where he disappeared to for 2 full months before he came home different, quieter, scared of the woods he used to love." I felt something shift in my chest, A memory that wasn't quite mine but close enough to touch. Flashes of trees and a low fire and someone's hands wrapping a wound, gentle despite the sharp claws. "I don't remember," I said, and it came out cracked, "but some part of me believes you." The hunter who'd first raised his bow shifted his weight, uncertain now, glancing at his companions. Whatever confidence he'd had about shooting a beastman in cold blood was fatting fast in the face of Iron's mother's healer son, standing directly between them and their target. "Lower your weapons," Kale said suddenly. Every head turned to him, including mine. "Kale," one hunter started. "I said lower them," Kale snapped, and there was something raw and furious underneath his voice, but it wasn't aimed at Roran anymore. It was aimed at the situation itself, at 3 years of secrets, at a truth that had been standing in these woods the whole time waiting to be found. "Nobody kills anyone until I understand what happened to my husband." The word husband cracked something open in Roran's face, pain flashing there sharp and sudden, and he looked down at the ground for the first time since this whole confrontation started. "I'm sorry," Roran said quietly. "I didn't come back to take anything from you. I came back because I felt him again. After 3 years of nothing, I felt the bond wake up, faint but there, and I couldn't stay away." "The bond," Kale repeated slowly. "What bond?" Roran finally looked up, and his gold eyes were tired now, tired in a way that went deeper than blood loss. "Beastfolk don't choose mates the way humans choose partners. It's not a ceremony. It's not vows spoken in front of gods. It's something the body decides on its own, something you feel the second you find the right person, whether you want it or not." He paused, breathing shallow. "I felt it the day I found Iron lost in these woods. And I know he felt it too, even if he never understood what it meant." My mind flooded suddenly with something that felt like memory but sharper, more solid than anything Iron's foggy thoughts had given me before. A boy, younger, scared, lost far from home. A stranger with gold eyes who didn't attack, who instead built a fire and shared food and asked nothing in return. Weeks passing. Something growing between them that neither had a name for. "I remember the fire," I said slowly, the words coming out before I fully understood where they came from. "I remember you teaching me to start one without flint. I remember you carrying me on your back when I twisted my ankle." Roran's whole body went still, gold eyes widening slightly. "You remember?" "Pieces," I admitted. "Just pieces, but they're real, aren't they?" "They're real," he said, voice breaking slightly on the words. Kale made a sound beside me, something between a laugh and a sob, and when I looked at him his eyes were wet, jaw clenched tight against whatever he was feeling. "So the whole time," he said, "every time you flinched from my hand, every time you looked at me like you were trying to remember why you loved me, it wasn't me you were struggling to remember. It was him." "Kale," I started. "No," he said, holding up a hand, not angry, just exhausted, like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just realized what it actually weighed. "I loved you. I still love you. But I always felt like there was a door in you I couldn't open. Now I know why. It was never mine to open." Roran shifted, wincing hard as the movement pulled at his wound, and I dropped down beside him without thinking, hands already pressing against the injury, some healer's instinct from Iron's memory guiding me even through all this chaos. "You're still bleeding," I said. "You need help, real help, not a forest patch job." "I can't come into your village," Roran said, even as his eyes fluttered slightly from pain. "Not after all this, not with hunters standing right here." I looked up at the hunters, then at Kale, and something steady settled into my chest despite everything crumbling around it. "Then I'm not letting him go without treating this properly," I said. "If that's a problem, someone can explain to Sella why her son let a man bleed out in the woods over village politics." Nobody argued that. Kale stood there for a long moment, staring down at the two of us, some private battle playing out behind his eyes. Then, slowly, He lowered his bow completely and knelt down on Roran's other side, examining the wound with a hunter's practiced eye. "The arrow's deep," Kale said, voice flat now, professional, like focusing on the wound was easier than focusing on everything else happening around it. "It needs to come out carefully or he'll bleed worse." "You're helping him?" I asked, surprised. Kale's jaw tightened. "I'm not doing it for him," he said. Then, quieter, glancing at me, something softer breaking through the anger. "I'm doing it because you asked. Because whatever happens after tonight, I don't want blood on my hands that you'll blame me for later." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close to okay yet. But it was something, some fragile bridge being built in the middle of chaos, and I felt a rush of gratitude toward Kale that surprised me with how strong it was. Together, carefully, Kale and I worked the arrow free while Roran gritted his teeth and gripped the fallen tree hard enough to splinter the bark under his claws. The hunters stood back now, tension easing slightly, watching this strange scene unfold. A healer and a hunter working together to save the life of a beastman who by every rule of this village should have been an enemy. When the arrow finally came free, Roran let out a long breath, some of the tension leaving his shoulders as I packed the wound with clean cloth, pressing firm. "You need real medicine on this," I said. "Herbs at least, something to stop infection." "There's a healer's hut," Kale said slowly, like the words cost him something to say, "just outside the village border, neutral ground, not technically inside our walls." He looked at me, something unreadable in his expression. "We could take him there. Nobody would question it as harboring an enemy." Roran's gold eyes flicked to Kale, surprised. "Why would you help me get to safety?" Kale's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. "Because Iron would never forgive me if I let you die out here, and I would never forgive myself." He paused, voice quieter now. "Even if part of me wants to hate you for existing, I can't hate someone Iron loves. That's not who I want to be." Something passed between the three of us in that moment, painful and complicated, grief and jealousy tangled together with something that might, eventually, given enough time, become understanding. We carried Roran between us to the healer's hut at the village border, the hunters dispersing behind us, murmuring amongst themselves about a story they'd be telling for years. Sella met us at the door, took one look at Roran's face, one look at mine, and one look at Kale's exhausted expression, and simply stepped aside to let us in without a single question, like some part of her had been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment. As I laid Roran down on the small cot inside, his hand caught mine, weak but certain. "Thank you," he said softly, "for remembering even just a little." "I still don't understand everything," I admitted. "But I know I'm not going to let you disappear again. Whatever this bond means, whatever it costs, I want to actually understand it, all the way through." Kale stood in the doorway, watching the two of us, something heavy and unresolved still sitting in his chest. But underneath it, something new, a kind of tired peace settling in. The peace of a man who finally understood the shape of a mystery he'd been carrying alone for years. "We'll figure this out," Kale said quietly to both of us, maybe to himself as much as anyone. "Together, somehow, because pretending none of this happened would only hurt everyone more." Outside, the 2 pale suns were finally rising over the tree line, casting soft golden light through the small window. And for the first time since I'd woken up in this strange body, in this strange world, I felt something settle in my chest that felt a lot like hope. Roran healed slowly, over the course of 2 weeks, tucked away in that small healer's hut at the edge of the village. I visited him every day, sometimes with Sella's herbs, sometimes just to sit with him while he slept off the fever that came the first few nights. Kale came too, more often than I expected. At first he just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching from a distance like he wasn't sure he belonged in the room. But slowly, day by day, he started coming inside, sitting down, talking, even in short, careful sentences at first, then longer ones about hunting, about the village, about nothing important at all, just filling the silence with something other than grief. One afternoon, I found the two of them actually laughing about something. Roran recounting some story about a hunter who once tried to trap him with a net clearly built for rabbits, and Kale shaking his head, grudging amusement pulling at the corner of his mouth despite himself. I stood in the doorway and watched them for a moment before either noticed me, and something in my chest eased, watching two men who by every right should have hated each other, finding some small, strange peace instead. "You're both ridiculous," I said, stepping inside. "He started it," Kale said, nodding at Roran, and Roran just grinned, sharp teeth and all, unrepentant. It wasn't simple. I want to be honest about that. There were nights Kale sat outside under the stars alone, working through something heavy in his own heart, and I'd find him there and sit beside him without saying anything, just being present while he processed a grief that didn't have an easy name. There were mornings Roran flinched at how close Kale and I still were, old instincts of jealousy and loss flickering across his face before he caught himself and pushed them down. But we talked, all three of us more than once sitting together in that small hut, working through what this meant, what any of us actually wanted, instead of pretending the truth away. "I'm not going to pretend I don't love him," I told Kale one evening, the two of us alone by the river while Roran rested. "But I'm not going to pretend what we had wasn't real either. You knew me, cared for me, married me, long before any of this came out. That doesn't just disappear because of a memory I got back." Kale was quiet for a long moment, skipping a small stone across the water's surface. "I know," he said finally. "I've known for weeks, if I'm being honest. I just needed time to stop being angry about it." "Are you still angry?" He considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things. "Less than I was," he admitted. I think I'd rather have you happy, even if that happiness has room in it for someone else, than have you here pretending the way you were before all this happened. I saw how you used to flinch, Iron. I don't want that version of us back." That conversation didn't fix everything overnight, but it cracked something open between the three of us, something honest, and honest, even when it hurts, tends to heal faster than pretending ever does. By the time Roran was fully healed, walking without wincing, the wound on his side reduced to a thin, pale scar, something had shifted in the village too. Word had spread, the way word always does in small places, about the beast man who'd been crossing the border for months not out of malice, but out of a broken bond aching to be whole again. Some villagers still eyed him with suspicion. Old fears don't vanish just because a story gets told once. But others, the ones who'd watched Kale and me carry him through the village gate ourselves, blood-soaked and desperate, started to soften just a little, the way people do when they witness compassion up close instead of hearing about danger from a distance. Myrna, of all people, was the one who finally sat the three of us down one evening and laid it out plainly. "The old bonds," she said, "the ones beast folk carry, they're older than any binding ceremony we perform, older than any law this village has written." She looked pointedly at Kale. "You married a man already claimed by something deeper than paperwork. That's not your fault, and it's not Iron's fault either. But pretending the old bond doesn't exist won't make it go away." "So what do?" Kale asked, and there was no anger left in his voice by then, just tiredness and something like acceptance settling into its place. Myrna's eyes moved between the three of us, weighing something carefully. "There's an old custom," she said slowly. "Rarely used anymore, but it exists. A joining, not a replacing. One that lets a bonded pair welcome a third into their circle honestly without pretending the first bond was a mistake." She paused. "It requires all three of you to agree, freely, nobody forced." I looked at Kale. I looked at Roran. Neither of them said anything right away, both waiting, I realized, for me to speak first, since in some strange way I was the string that tied the two of them together in the first place. "I don't want to choose between the family I remember," I said slowly, "and the one I'm just starting to remember losing. I don't think I have to, not if you're both willing to try." Roran's gold eyes softened, something vulnerable flickering there. "I've spent 3 years alone, aching for something I couldn't name," he said quietly. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life fighting the man who actually took care of you when I couldn't." He looked at Kale. "If you're willing, I am too." Kale was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands, and when he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes that he didn't bother hiding anymore. "I loved him enough to almost shoot the man he loves in these woods," Kale said, voice rough. "That should tell you how much I care about doing this right, however strange it looks to everyone else." He took a breath. "So yes, I'm willing. If it means keeping him happy and whole, I'm willing." The joining ceremony happened 3 weeks later, under the 2 pale suns. The whole village gathered in a loose circle at the edge of the forest. The same trees that had once hidden secrets now witnessing something honest instead. Sela cried through the entire thing, muttering about finally understanding why her son used to wander into those woods so often as a boy. Some small part of him always searching for something he couldn't name. Standing between Kale and Roran that day, hands linked with both of them, I felt something settle fully into place for the first time since I'd woken up in this strange new world. Not because everything made perfect sense. It didn't, not really. But because for the first time, nobody was pretending. Not me, not Kale, not Roran. Just 3 people choosing honesty over easy answers, choosing each other despite how complicated the shape of that choice turned out to be. Later that night, the 3 of us sat together outside the healer's hut, watching the stars come out one by one over the treetops. Roran's tail curled lazily against my leg, Kale's shoulder warm against mine on the other side. "Do you regret any of it?" Kale asked quietly, not looking at me, watching the stars instead. "Waking up in this life, all this chaos landing on you all at once." I thought about it honestly before answering. The fear of waking up in a stranger's body. The confusion of 2 suns and a bell that meant danger. The ache of memories that weren't fully mine, tangled up with a grief and love that somehow became mine anyway. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. Because whatever brought me here, whatever strange twist of fate landed me in this body in this world, it also brought me to this. And this," I said, glancing between the 2 of them, "this is worth every confusing, terrifying moment that came before it." Roran huffed out something like a laugh, low and warm. "Careful," he said. That almost sounded romantic. "Don't get used to it," I said, and Kale laughed too, real and easy. The kind of laugh that only comes when a person finally feels safe enough to let their guard down completely. Above us, the stars kept shining, steady and unbothered by everything it had taken the 3 of us to get to this quiet moment together. And for the first time since I'd opened my eyes on that cold, wet hillside, I understood something simple and true. Sometimes the family you find isn't the one you expected. Sometimes love doesn't follow a straight line, or a single path, or a simple rule book written by people who never had to live inside a bond like ours. Sometimes it just asks you to be honest, even when honesty is messy, even when it takes 3 people instead of 2 to make something whole. And sometimes, that messy, complicated honesty is exactly what makes a happy ending real. Lesson from this story: true belonging comes not from pretending the truth away, but from having the courage to face it honestly together. If this story pulled you in, don't forget to subscribe. I've got so many more stories like this one coming, and I'd love for you to stick around for the next one.